Friends, a beautiful girl was taken away by a ferocious lion from the jungle. And then what this lion did to the girl eyewitnesses describe it in this way. The villagers kept watching, unable to do anything. What happened next to the girl at the hands of the lion? The story is very interesting. Make sure to watch the video until the end. The story goes like this. There was a king who was very kind-hearted. One day, the king was sitting on his throne in his palace. Around him sat his legal advisers and ministers, including Bashir. Just then, an old woman came in crying. That old woman, while weeping, said, "O honourable king, something very terrible has happened to me. I have come from very far away. I am a widow. There is no man to support me, and I have a beautiful daughter. I was very happy with my daughter. My husband passed away, and I mourned in grief during my waiting period, staying at home. For a few days, people brought food to my home and took care of me. But as time passed, they began to say that they could no longer take responsibility for me and that I must take care of myself. I also did not want to live dependent on others. When my mourning period was over, I started working. Every day, I would go to the jungle, cut wood, and sell it in the city. The money I earned from selling that wood was enough to feed myself and my daughter. Out of that money, I had saved some for my daughter's wedding. I have kept my daughter hidden behind 7 veils. The reason for this is that my daughter is extremely beautiful. Whenever a person sees her once, they cannot help but look at her again and again. That is why I have kept my daughter hidden from the eyes of the world. But, O honourable king, now my life has been struck by a great calamity. Asterisk, asterisk. How can I protect my daughter's honour? The old woman cried as she spoke. The king said, "When you have kept your daughter hidden behind 7 veils, how did her honour get tarnished? Tell me clearly." The old woman, sobbing, replied, "O honourable king, I cannot say this in front of so many people." The king reassured her, "You do not need to worry. There is no one here who will go and spread your words outside. You can speak freely so that we may help you." The old woman said, "O honourable king, I know that your people are very trustworthy, but I have only one daughter. I cannot talk about her in front of everyone. I want to speak with you alone." Hearing this, the king stood up from his throne and ordered his guards to bring the old woman to his chamber. Soon the old woman was brought before the king. The king said, "O old mother, now you can share your troubles freely." The old woman began to weep and said, "O honourable king, as I told you, my daughter is very beautiful. That is why, when I used to go to work in the jungle, I would take her with me. There were many young men in our village, and I did not want any of them to visit my house in my absence because my daughter is extremely beautiful. Keeping this in mind, I would take my daughter with me to the jungle to collect firewood, but I never knew that the very fear I was trying to avoid would turn into a noose around my neck. When my daughter and I worked in the jungle cutting wood, she would remove her veil because it was difficult to breathe in the forest and the work was very strenuous. For 2 days, I had a feeling that someone was watching us, but I dismissed it as my imagination. However, when we returned home after collecting firewood, my daughter told me the same thing. She said, "Mother, I feel like someone is watching us in the jungle." Now, my doubt turned into certainty. I decided that from that day onwards, I would no longer take my daughter to the jungle with me. I would leave her at home instead. From that day on, I would leave my daughter at home and go to the jungle alone to collect firewood. Every day, I would return home in the evening when darkness had already fallen. But when I looked at my daughter, she seemed very happy. Her face always looked radiant. I could not understand this. When I asked my daughter about it, she would say, "Mother, it is just your imagination." My daughter always looked beautiful and always had a smile on her face. This made me suspicious. One day, I told my daughter that I was going to work, but instead, I pretended to leave but stayed at home. My daughter had no idea that I was still there. I wanted to find out the truth behind her unusual happiness. I hid and started watching secretly. After some time, a young man arrived at our house. His hair was very long. He entered our home, sat next to my daughter, and slowly began to touch her. When I saw this scene, I felt immense pain. I was deeply hurt. The daughter for whom I had worked so hard was repaying me like this. Seeing her like that, I was overcome with anger. I was burning with rage. I immediately rushed out and slapped my daughter hard across the face. But what happened next, I had never imagined. As soon as I slapped my daughter, the young man pushed me forcefully. The impact sent me crashing against the wall. My daughter did not like what had just happened. She started yelling at the young man, saying, "How dare you? Why did you push my mother?" The young man glared at me for a few moments, then stomped his feet angrily and left. After he left, I was furious at my daughter. I scolded her, asking, "What were you doing?" My daughter responded, "Mother, this boy has been coming to our house for a few days. He says he likes me. He expresses his love for me. And today, by coincidence, you came home and saw us together. He was just joking about something, and that made me smile." Hearing my daughter's words, I felt even more enraged. I couldn't believe she was telling me the truth. I felt like she was lying. My daughter was the last memory of my husband. I had raised her with so much love, and that is why I had never scolded her before. I fell silent. I did not want to get angrier at her. Perhaps she would drift away from me. So I chose to remain quiet. "Oh, Honourable King, 2 days passed since this incident. I no longer went out to work. I stayed at home most of the time. But last night, something terrifying happened. That young man came to our house. He demanded that I give him my daughter. Hearing this, I scolded him and tried to throw him out of the house. That young man pushed me once again and forcibly took my daughter out of the house. I ran after my daughter, but when I saw the scene in front of me, the ground beneath my feet seemed to disappear. Right outside my house, a massive lion was roaring in anger. That young man took my daughter and placed her on the lion's back. Now my daughter was sitting atop the lion. Seeing this, I was terrified. The villagers wanted to save my daughter, but the lion was roaring furiously. That man-eating beast stood before us, and my steps froze in fear. I was helpless, unable to do anything. Right before my eyes, that ferocious lion carried my daughter away. "Oh, Honourable King, I have travelled from far away to seek your help. I have come with great hopes. Please help me. I beg you bring back my daughter safely. I know that you are a just ruler, a merciful king who takes care of his people. Please help me. My daughter is all I have. She is my only support in my old age. I cannot lose her." Hearing the old woman's plea, the king was in disbelief. How could a lion possibly take her daughter away? But seeing the woman's distress, the king made her a promise, would bring her daughter back safely. The king had given his word, but even he did not know how he would fulfill it. As the widow was leaving, she shared one more detail with the king. She said, "Oh, Honourable King, I suspect that the young man came from the jungle. His hair was very long, his fingernails were sharp and untrimmed, and his appearance was wild, as if he lived in the forest. And as I had feared, someone had indeed been watching us in the jungle. Ever since I left my daughter at home, all of this has been happening, the widow continued. That is why I suspect that the young man lives in the jungle. After all, lions also live in the jungle, so perhaps this boy is from the jungle too. Hearing this, the king became convinced that the young man indeed resided in the jungle. The king's soldiers respectfully escorted the widow back to her home. Afterward, the king resumed his court session, where many petitioners had gathered to present their grievances. However, the king's mind was preoccupied with the old woman's words. He couldn't figure out how to help her. The fact that the young man was from the jungle made sense. But what puzzled him was the lion. How could a lion take a girl away without harming her? Lions are man-eaters. The thought troubled the king deeply. As the evening prayer, Zuhr time approached, the king decided to perform his prayers. After completing his prayer, he devised a plan. He summoned his soldiers and explained everything to them. By the time night fell, the king instructed his men, "We will head toward the jungle. This is the time when all animals return to their shelters. It is the perfect moment to search for the widow's daughter. Once I give the signal, all of you must follow." The king had given his command, and now it was time to execute the plan. He disguised himself, ensuring he would not be recognized, and set off toward the jungle. As he ventured deeper, the dense trees cast eerie shadows. The night was dark, and strange animal sounds echoed through the forest. The king had been travelling for a long distance when suddenly he noticed a clearing behind the bushes. As he peered ahead, he could not believe his eyes. Everything the widow had said was true. In the clearing, a young man was sitting with a beautiful girl. They were engrossed in conversation. But the most astonishing sight was that 4 lions were circling around them, yet they did not harm them. The king, fearless, moved forward. The sound of his footsteps made the lions alert. Even the young man sensed that someone had arrived. Realizing that someone was approaching, the young man quickly positioned the girl behind him. He told her to cover herself and hastily dressed himself as well. Then he stood up, facing the direction of the intruder. The king observed everything carefully. He now had no doubt this young man was indeed a resident of the jungle. His long, unkempt hair and his sharp, claw-like fingernails confirmed it. His nails were also extremely long, and even his face did not resemble that of a normal human. He looked completely wild. Just as the widow had described, her daughter was incredibly beautiful. The girl standing beside the young man was indeed the widow's daughter. She was breathtakingly beautiful complexion, was as fair as an egg. Her eyes were a striking blue, and her lips were a soft pink. She looked enchanting. The king was now certain that this girl was the widow's daughter. The king fixed his piercing gaze on the young man and, in a loud, commanding voice, said, "It is certain that you have recognized me. If not, let me introduce myself. I am the king of this empire, and I have come to arrest you." The young man, with utmost respect, responded, "O honourable king, what crime have I committed that you have come to arrest me?" The king, looking directly at him, replied, "You have committed a grave offence. You abducted a girl from my people. For this crime, I am here to take you into custody." Upon hearing the king's words, the young man burst into loud laughter. He turned to the girl and said, mockingly, "Do Did you hear that? The king says he has come to arrest me. How can they possibly catch me? I am the ruler of the jungle. No one can capture me. The king, unwavering, responded, Even if you are the ruler of the jungle and reside here, you are still a human. If you can prove your innocence, I will let you go. But if you fail to do so, I will take you with me. And as a king, this is my command, you must obey it. The moment the king issued his command, the young man attempted to flee. However, according to the king's plan, his entire army had already arrived at the scene. The soldiers had surrounded the lions, keeping them in check. The king's archers had their arrows aimed at the lions, ready to strike. The wild young man now understood that escaping was impossible. Realizing he had no way out, he raised both hands in surrender and said, "O honorable king, please order your soldiers to lower their arrows immediately. None of my lion friends should be harmed. I am ready to go with you." The king ordered his soldiers to lower their weapons and commanded them to put shackles on the young man. The soldiers chained him, and the entire group, including the widow's daughter, began their journey back to the palace. The 4 lions seemed enraged and ready to attack the king's army. However, the young man spoke to them in a way that made them retreat to their dens. No one knew what he had said to them, but they obeyed. Upon reaching the palace, the king ordered that the young man and the girl be placed in separate chambers. A judgment was to be announced in the morning. By dawn, crowds from far and wide gathered to hear the verdict. The grand court was prepared with great magnificence. Ministers and advisers took their seats, and the people of the city assembled in the royal courtroom. Soon the king entered, raised his hand, and declared, "Silence, everyone. Now we will announce our decision." Upon the king's command, the entire court fell silent, eagerly awaiting his verdict. The old widow had also arrived, anxiously anticipating justice for her daughter. The king turned to the wild young man and said, "Tell us your full story. How did you end up in the jungle? Why did you abduct this girl? And how did those lions become your friends?" The young man looked at the king and sighed. "Had this not been a matter of love, I would have never revealed my story to you humans. I would have never come among your kind, nor would I have shared my past. But I love this girl. The truth is," he continued, "when I was born, someone abandoned me in the jungle. Around the same time, a lioness had just given birth to 4 cubs. That lioness mistook me for one of her own and believed that she had given birth to me as well. She accepted me as her child and raised me alongside her cubs. She cared for me just as she did for them. As I grew older, I developed all the traits of the lions. But the strange thing was that I could speak both like humans and like animals. I understood the language of animals as well as the language of humans. I could comprehend what they were saying. Sometimes I would look at the animals and feel deeply troubled. Was this really my family? If they were my kin, then why did I not look like them? However, when I turned 12, the truth about my past was finally revealed. One day, while I was playing in the jungle, a woman arrived with a man. They looked just like me. The woman began calling out the name Umar, and then turned to the man saying, "If only you had listened to me back then, if only you had married me, we could have given our child your name. Our son would not have been called illegitimate, but instead you took my baby from me and threw him into the jungle." Hearing their conversation, I understood everything. I was their child. That moment filled me with hatred for humans. I realized how cruel people could be. I was overwhelmed with rage and wanted to kill them both. But then A sense of mercy held me back. No matter what, they were still my parents. After they left, I accepted the lioness and her 4 cubs as my true family. I played with them, and I was happy among them, but in my solitude, I felt a deep sadness. I often thought, if only I had a real family of my own. This was how my life passed in the jungle. One day, I saw an old woman and a beautiful young girl enter our jungle, searching for firewood. My lion brothers caught the scent of human flesh and wanted to attack them. But when my eyes fell upon the girl, I was spellbound. Never in my life had I seen such beauty. The moment I saw her, my world changed. My heart filled with love for her. My lion brothers moved forward, ready to kill them, but I stopped them. I ordered them not to harm the mother and daughter. From that moment on, I kept a watchful eye on them. The old woman soon became suspicious, sensing that someone was watching them. Out of fear, she decided to leave her daughter at home while she went to the jungle alone. For me, this was a moment of joy now. The girl stayed alone at home. I began visiting their house. I told her about my love for her. Soon, I started coming to her home every day, speaking to her with love and affection. Over time, she began to like me too. But one day, the old woman caught us together and threw me out of the house. I was filled with fury. 2 days passed after I returned to the jungle, and I was losing my mind with anger. For 2 days, I hadn't seen her, nor had I met her. I was restless, tormented by the longing to see her. My desperation to meet her was unbearable. Determined, I took my lion friend and went to her house. My only intention was to meet her, but her mother pushed me away and tried to throw me out of the house. That enraged me. In my fury, I pushed her mother back and forcibly placed the girl on the lion's back. At the edge of the village stood a mosque. I took the girl there and summoned the Molvi, Islamic scholar. In his presence, I married the girl. After our marriage, I took her to the jungle with me. My entire life had been spent in the jungle. My family, my home, everything was there. That's why I wanted to take my wife to the jungle as well. Just when I was about to spend loving moments with her, you arrived, O Honourable King. Seeing us together, you assumed that we were engaged in something unlawful. But let me tell you, I may be a wild man, but I understand human traditions. We are husband and wife. We are bound by marriage. My only request to you is to let us live happily together. Hearing the young man's story, the king felt pity for him. He said, "Your story is both sorrowful and fascinating. But have you thought about the old mother? The woman who has no husband to support her, who raised her daughter with so much love and care you, have separated her from her only child. If she agrees, then you may stay with her daughter. Accept her as your mother and take care of her like a son." The young man's face lit up with joy. He replied, "If the old woman agrees, I promise that I will stay in the city. I will only visit the jungle occasionally to meet my animal friends." The widow, upon hearing this, agreed. She said, "If I can have a son along with my daughter, what more could I ask for?" Thus, she gave her consent, accepting the young man as her son. The king then declared his final judgment before the grand court. "From this day forward, this young man will live in the widow's house as her son. He will care for her. No one will trouble him or his wife. They will live together in peace." With that, the king left the court. The widow took her daughter and her new son home. The young man was now a part of their family. He lived happily with his wife and would occasionally visit the jungle to see his old friends. Friends, we hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.